The village had long been abandoned, swallowed by the relentless embrace of the forest. Thick vines coiled around the remnants of homes, their wooden frames reduced to skeletal ruins. A once thriving settlement, now only silence and shadows remained, a ghost of what had been. The villagers spoke of a curse, a wrathful spirit that claimed the land as its own. None dared to enter, for those who ventured too close never returned. Apinio had heard these tales since childhood, but he was not one to be frightened by old stories. A skilled hunter and restless soul, he often sought adventure where others feared to tread. The whispers of the abandoned village intrigued him more than they warned him. If there was something lurking in the ruins, he wanted to see it with his own eyes. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Apinio crossed the river that marked the village's boundary. The air was thick, unmoving, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. His steps were careful, his grip firm around the spear he carried. He expected decay, perhaps the remnants of a forgotten past, but he did not expect to find her. She stood amidst the ruins, a vision of quiet sorrow. Draped in a flowing white shawl, her long dark hair cascaded down her back like a waterfall of ink. Her presence was out of place, yet she seemed to belong, as if she had always been a part of the village. She turned, meeting his gaze with eyes that held the weight of centuries. "You should not be here," she said softly, her voice carrying the wind's lament. Apinio did not move. He had met many women in his life, but none quite like her. There was an air of mystery about her, something unearthly yet familiar. "Neither should you," he countered. "Who are you?" She hesitated, then offered a small smile, though sadness lingered at the edges. "Lena," she said. "I have always been here." Apinio frowned. That was impossible. The village had been abandoned for decades. And yet, something in her voice made him hesitate. He did not press her, instead choosing to observe. The way she moved graceful, deliberate. The way she looked at the ruins, not with fear but with knowing. Curiosity took root in his chest, growing with each passing moment. "I've never seen you in the nearby villages," he said. "Where do you stay?" She looked past him, to the forest beyond. "Nowhere you would understand." The cryptic response only deepened his interest. He stepped closer, the tension between them shifting from unease to something else, something neither of them could name. The days passed, and despite the warnings echoing in the back of his mind, Apinio returned. Each evening, he found Lena waiting, her presence as inevitable as the setting sun. Their conversations stretched into the night, filled with hushed laughter and whispered secrets. She spoke of the past as if she had lived it, of a village that once thrived, of love lost and promises broken. One night, as they sat on a crumbling step, he found himself staring at her hands, delicate yet strong. "You speak of this place as if it still breathes," he said. "As if the past is not gone." She lowered her gaze. "Because it isn't." Something flickered in the air around them, a presence unseen but felt. A shiver ran down Apinio's spine, though he did not know why. He reached for her hand on impulse, his callous fingers brushing against hers. She did not pull away. Instead, she looked at him with an expression he could not decipher. "Apinio," she said, his name lingering on her lips like a forgotten prayer. "You must not love me." He let out a quiet laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Why?" Her fingers curled slightly around his. "Because love is what brought ruin to this village." The words hung between them, heavier than the night itself. The stories, the warnings, he had dismissed them as mere superstition. But Lena was not a superstition. She was real. And if she was real, then so was the curse. A sudden gust of wind rustled the trees, sending a murmur through the ruins. Apinio felt it then, the shift in the air, the weight of something unseen pressing against his chest. He looked at Lena, at the sadness in her eyes, and for the first time he felt fear. Not of her but for her. He had come seeking adventure, but he had found something far more dangerous. He had found her. And now, he could not walk away. The forest around the village grew restless. The trees, once silent witnesses to Apinio and Lena's secret meetings, now seemed to whisper warnings in voices he could not understand. The air was heavier, thick with an unseen force pressing against his skin. He felt it in the way the shadows stretched unnaturally at dusk, in the way the wind carried a distant lament, sorrow woven into its breath. Yet he could not stay away. Each evening he returned to her, drawn by a force beyond reason. Lena, always waiting, always watching, with sadness that never left her eyes. She no longer smiled as she once did. No longer reached for his hand in the quiet moments between words. She had grown distant, as if something unseen loomed between them, pulling her away. One night, as he entered the village, a strange unease settled in his bones. The ruins looked different, older, as if time had suddenly decided to reclaim them. The air smelled of damp earth and something else, something metallic, like blood left too long in the open air. Lena stood near the remnants of what must have once been a shrine, her face pale beneath the silver light of the moon. "You should not be here tonight," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Apinio took a step closer, the weight of her words pressing against him like an unseen hand pushing him back. "Tell me why," he demanded, his patience fraying. "No more riddles, Lena. I deserve to know." Her hands trembled at her sides, fingers curling into fists. "Because he knows now," she said. "He feels your presence. He is waking." A deep silence followed, stretching between them like the abyss of an unseen chasm. Apinio did not need to ask who she meant. The stories, the warnings. He had dismissed them. But now he could feel it, the shifting air. The pull of something ancient and angry stirring beneath the surface of the land. The shrine behind her was cracked and weathered. But even through its decay, he could make out carvings. Figures in anguish, a monstrous shape looming above them, its hollow eyes staring outward. His blood ran cold. "This is him, isn't it?" he said, his voice hushed. "The one who cursed this place." Lena nodded, her gaze never leaving the shrine. "Atsala," she whispered. "Once a man. Once my beloved." The word struck like a blade. Apinio had known there was more to Lena than she had let on. But this was something he had not expected. He opened his mouth to speak, to demand the truth. But before he could, the ground beneath them trembled. A deep guttural sound rumbled through the village, something primal, something wrong. The air turned ice cold, and the shadows around them twisted and stretched, taking unnatural shapes. Apinio turned sharply, his grip tightening on his spear. But there was nothing there. Only the ruins. Only the darkness pressing closer. Lena's breath came shallow and quick. "It's too late," she said. "He's coming." A force unlike anything Apinio had ever felt slammed into him, knocking him back. The air around him burned and froze all at once, his vision blurring as an invisible weight pressed against his chest. A sound filled the space, a wail, a scream, a roar that came from everywhere and nowhere at once. From the darkness something moved, a shape impossibly tall, impossibly thin, its form shifting like smoke caught in a storm. Its eyes hollow, endless, fixed on Lena. Atsala had awakened. Lena took a step forward, her hands raised as if to calm a beast that could not be tamed. "It is me you want," she said, her voice steady despite the terror that quaked in the air. "Not him." Apinio struggled to rise, but the force held him down. He could only watch as the demon's form twisted, its face contorting into something resembling a grin. The voice that came from it was not a voice at all, but a sound that clawed at the mind, an echo of sorrow and rage. "You betrayed me," it whispered. And though it spoke to Lena, Apinio felt the weight of its words as if they were meant for him. Lena did not flinch. "I never betrayed you," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I was taken from you." The demon's form shuddered, as if the word struck something deep within its being. The wind howled, the earth trembled, and for a brief moment, the village seemed to come alive, the past and present colliding in a terrible, desperate struggle. Apinio forced himself to his feet, his body screaming in protest. He had no magic, no weapons that could fight a curse, but he could not stand by and watch. He stepped between them, his spear raised, though he knew it was useless. "Take me instead," he said. Lena's eyes widened in horror. "No." The demon stilled. For the first time, it regarded Apinio, truly looking at him. The hollow gaze bore into him, peeling back flesh and soul, as if searching for something hidden beneath. Then it laughed, a sound so broken, so filled with pain, that it made the air itself tremble. "You would give yourself for her?" it asked. Apinio did not waver. "I would." The demon's grin twisted into something unreadable. Then suffer as I have suffered. A rush of darkness surged forward, swallowing Epinho whole. The last thing he heard was Lena's scream, her voice breaking as she cried his name. Then, there was nothing but silence. Darkness engulfed Epinho, an abyss where time lost all meaning. He felt weightless, suspended in a void that whispered his name in 1,000 broken voices. The world he had known was gone, replaced by a cold, unending nothingness. Then a flicker, small, fragile but real. A warmth unlike the suffocating blackness that surrounded him. It was a voice, distant yet unmistakable. Lena. His body ached as he opened his eyes, though he could not tell if he stood in the ruins, or in some place beyond them. Shadows writhed at the edges of his vision, curling like smoke, and before him loomed Atsala, his form shifting, flickering between the monstrous and the human. The demon's hollow eyes bore into him, but Epinho no longer felt fear. You cannot take him, Lena's voice rang out, steady despite the tremor beneath it. She stepped between them, her presence an unyielding light against the encroaching dark. His soul is not yours to claim. Atsala tilted his head, something almost like amusement in his gaze. And yours? Lena exhaled shakily, but her resolve did not break. If I offer myself, will you let him go? Epinho's breath caught. No, he said, his voice hoarse. You don't have to do this. She turned to him then, her eyes filled with something deeper than sorrow, something older than time itself. I was never meant to stay, she whispered. But you must live. Atsala's form stilled, the air around them thickening. You would give yourself to me once more? Lena nodded, her hands trembling. If it will end this, yes. Epinho lunged forward, but an unseen force held him back. He fought against it, desperation clawing at his chest, but it was as though the very air refused to let him move. Lena turned away from him, stepping toward the demon, her form illuminated by an eerie glow. She raised a hand, placing it against Atsala's chest, and for the first time, the demon recoiled. The shadows around them pulsed, writhing as if in agony. A low, guttural sound tore from Atsala's throat. Not rage, but something else. Something closer to grief. I waited, the demon whispered, its voice fractured raw. I waited for you to return. Lena's expression softened, and for a fleeting moment, she was no longer a ghost caught between two worlds. She was a woman, the woman Atsala had once loved, the one he had lost to a cruel fate. I never left you, she murmured. I was taken. The words seemed to unravel something deep within the demon. His form wavered, shifting between what he had become and the man he had once been. The howling wind died down, the village ruins no longer trembling beneath his fury. Epinho felt the weight around him lift, and suddenly he could move again. He rushed forward, reaching for Lena, but she only shook her head. You must go, she said softly. No, he whispered, his hands gripping hers, unwilling to let her slip away. We can find another way. She smiled, then gentle, aching final. This is the only way. A blinding light erupted between them, swallowing the darkness whole. Epinho staggered back, shielding his eyes as the shadows peeled away, torn from the village like mist burned by the morning sun. Atsala let out a final anguished cry, and then silence. When Epinho opened his eyes, Lena was gone. The ruins, once suffocating under the weight of their curse, now stood quiet still. The air was lighter, the forest no longer watching with wary eyes. The village was free. He stood there for a long time, listening to the wind. It no longer carried the sorrow of lost souls. But if he listened closely, if he closed his eyes and let the world fade away, he could almost hear her voice. And on nights when the moon hung low and the forest whispered secrets, he returned to the village, waiting, hoping. Because love, even in death, never truly fades.